The outcast. Naira's four-fingered hands trembled as she scraped at the hard soil of Veraxis IV, desperately searching for the moisture-bearing roots that might sustain her for another day. The harsh winds of the barren world whipped her tattered garments against her slender frame, her once lustrous violet skin now dull and cracked from exposure. 3 full cycles had passed since the Velteri ship had departed, leaving her with nothing but the ceremonial exile blade and the clothes on her back. The twin suns of Veraxis began their slow descent toward the horizon, painting the desolate landscape in hues of crimson and gold. Night would bring the biting cold that had nearly claimed her during the first cycle. Naira glanced nervously at the sky, anxiety tightening her chest. She needed shelter before darkness fell. A sob caught in her throat as her fingers finally closed around a pale, fleshy root. She pulled it free, brushing away the dirt before sinking her teeth into its bitter flesh. The moisture within was barely enough to wet her parched mouth, but it would keep her alive. For now. Survival wasn't supposed to be her burden. The Velteri did not believe in prolonging the inevitable. When the Council had declared her genetically insufficient, her bioluminescent patterns too dim, her reflexes too slow, her reasoning abilities below acceptable parameters, the judgment was meant to be a death sentence. Exile on an uninhabited world was merely a formality, a way to remove the defected from their society without directly spilling blood. Yet some stubborn part of Naira refused to yield to the expected outcome. Each morning she rose, despite the pain, despite the hunger, despite the crushing knowledge that her own people had deemed her unworthy of existence. "You dishonor us even in your exile," Elder Kazaran had hissed during the ceremony, his luminous skin pulsing with disgust. "May your spirit be cleansed by your suffering." Naira had not given them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She had stepped onto the transport with her head high, even as her hearts hammered with terror. But now, alone in the wilderness with only the howling wind for company, she allowed herself to weep, not for the life she had lost. The Velteri had never shown her kindness, but for the life she would never know. A distant rumble drew her attention skyward. At first, she thought it was thunder, another of the electrical storms that frequently ravaged the planet's surface. But the sound was wrong, too rhythmic, too mechanical. Her breath caught as a flare of light cut through the gathering dusk. A ship. For a moment, hope flared in her chest. Had the Velteri returned? Had the Council reconsidered? The thought died as quickly as it had formed. The Velteri never reversed their judgments. Never. The craft that descended through the atmosphere was unlike any Velteri vessel Naira had ever seen. It was bulkier, less elegant, its design prioritizing function over form. As it grew closer, engines roaring, she scrambled for the nearest outcropping of rocks, pressing her body into the shadows. The ship settled on the plain below, dust billowing around its landing struts. For long moments, nothing happened. Then, with a mechanical hiss, a ramp extended from its belly. Figures emerged, bipedal, like the Velteri, but stockier. Their movements were different too, more deliberate, with none of the fluid grace her people possessed. Even from a distance, Naira could see they were completely encased in protective gear, their faces hidden behind reflective visors. Humans. The word rose unbidden from her memory, dredged up from childhood lessons about the lesser species that populated the galaxy. Violent, unpredictable creatures that had somehow managed to spread across multiple star systems despite their technological inferiority. The Velteri had minimal contact with them, considering humans beneath their notice. Stories whispered among Velteri children portrayed humans as savage beasts, driven by base emotions rather than logic. They were said to wage war for irrational reasons, to cling to outdated traditions, to value sentiment over efficiency. Some tales even claimed they would fight to the death to protect their defective offspring, rather than culling them as any sensible species would. Naira shrank further into the shadows as the humans began to spread out, setting up equipment. Their voices carried on the wind, a strange, harsh language she couldn't understand. She should flee, find another hiding place far from these unpredictable creatures. but weakness and curiosity held her in place. What were they doing here? Verax's IV had no valuable resources, no strategic importance. It was why the Veltari had chosen it as an exile world. Nobody would ever come here by choice. The answer became apparent as the humans erected a series of devices around their ship. They were scientists, conducting some kind of survey. One of them, shorter than the others, seemed to be taking samples of the soil. Night fell fully, the temperature plummeting. The humans retreated to their ship, but lights continued to illuminate the area around their camp. Naira huddled in her rocky shelter, shivering uncontrollably as the cold seeped into her bones. She would not survive another night like this. The decision was made for her when the ground began to shake. At first, it was just a tremor, barely noticeable. Then the earth heaved, rocks tumbling down the slope around her. Naira scrambled to her feet as a fissure opened mere steps away, widening rapidly. The quake intensified. Unable to maintain her balance, she fell, rolling down the incline toward the human camp. Pain exploded through her body as she struck the ground. Again and again, powerless to stop her descent. A sharp crack, and agony lanced through her leg. The world spun, darkness encroaching on her vision. The last thing Naira saw before consciousness fled was a human figure running toward her, silhouetted against the lights of their ship. She awoke to brightness and the hum of machinery. For one disoriented moment, Naira thought she was back on the Veltari homeworld, in the sterile chambers where defectives were evaluated. Then the pain in her leg brought reality crashing back. She was lying on some kind of table, inside what appeared to be the human vessel. Medical equipment surrounded her, some of it attached to her body by thin tubes and wires. Panic seized her, and she tried to sit up, only to be gently pressed back down by a firm hand. "Easy there," said a voice. The words were alien, but somehow she understood them. A translation device, she realized, spotting a small unit attached to the human's collar. The human who had spoken was female, judging by the softer features and body structure. She had removed her protective gear, revealing pale skin and short hair, the color of Veraxian soil. Her eyes were startlingly bright, a vivid blue that reminded Naira of the distant seas of her homeworld. "You've got a nasty fracture," the human continued, gesturing to Naira's splinted leg. "And you're severely dehydrated and malnourished. What happened to you? Were you in a crash?" Naira stared at her, unable to comprehend why this creature was helping her. The Veltari would never waste resources on a defective, let alone an alien one. "I was abandoned," she finally whispered, the translation device rendering her words in the human language. "I am defective, unworthy of continued existence." The human's expression changed, something flashing in those blue eyes that Naira couldn't interpret. "Well, that's the biggest load of crap I've heard in a while." Before Naira could process this bizarre response, the door slid open and another human entered. This one was male, taller and broader, with darker skin and close-cropped black hair. "Commander Blake," the female human acknowledged. "Our patient is awake." The male, Commander Blake, approached, his movements measured. There was an air of authority about him, similar to a Veltari elder, but without the cold disdain she was accustomed to. "I'm Commander Marcus Blake of the Earth Science Vessel Horizon," he said. "This is Dr. Elena Reyes, our Chief Medical Officer. You're safe aboard our ship." "I am Naira," she replied, the formal introduction instinctive despite her circumstances. "Formerly of the third clutch of House Evren, now without standing." The words tasted bitter on her tongue. "Naira, can you tell us what you're doing on this planet? Our scans showed no settlements, no technology." She hesitated, shame burning within her, to admit her deficiency to these strangers. But what did it matter now? "I was exiled. The Council found me genetically insufficient. This world was chosen for my disposal." The silence that followed was heavy. Dr. Reyes and Commander Blake exchanged a look Naira couldn't decipher. "They left you here to die?" Dr. Reyes finally asked, her voice tight. "It is our way." Naira replied. "The defective must not contaminate the whole." Another look passed between the humans, this one charged with an emotion that made Naira distinctly uncomfortable. "Well," Commander Blake said after a moment, "it seems the quake has made this planet even less hospitable. Our sensors indicate increasing tectonic instability. We're evacuating our research team immediately." Fear gripped Naira's hearts. They would leave her here, as was proper, as was expected. She closed her eyes, preparing herself for the inevitable announcement of her abandonment. Instead, Blake continued, "Dr. Reyes, is she stable enough for transport?" "Yes, but she needs ongoing care, proper nutrition. Then prepare her for departure with the rest of us," he said, as if it were the most natural decision in the world. "We lift off in 30 minutes. Naira's eyes flew open. You're taking me with you." The concept was so alien, she could barely form the words. Blake's expression softened slightly. "We don't leave people behind to die, Naira. Not even defective ones." The last word was spoken with a strange inflection she didn't understand. As he turned to leave, Naira called out, "Commander." He paused, looking back at her. "Why?" she asked, unable to comprehend his actions. Blake studied her for a long moment. "Because that's what humans do," he said simply, and was gone. Left alone with Dr. Reyes, Naira sank back against the examination table, overwhelmed. Everything she knew about humans, everything she'd been taught, clashed violently with the reality before her. "They told us humans were savages," she whispered. Dr. Reyes smiled, a gentle expression that transformed her face. "Oh, we can be," she said, checking Naira's vital signs. "But savagery isn't always a bad thing, especially when it's in defense of those who can't defend themselves." The ship rumbled to life beneath them, preparing for departure. Outside, Varaxis IV was tearing itself apart, fissures spreading across its surface as ancient tectonic plates shifted. But for the first time since her exile, Naira felt something other than despair. It was a dangerous feeling, one she scarcely dared to name. Hope. New horizons. The horizon hummed around Naira as she took her first tentative steps without assistance, testing the strength of her healed leg. 6 weeks had passed since her rescue from Varaxis IV. 6 weeks of recovery, observation, and gradual integration into the strange rhythms of human existence. Dr. Reyes hovered nearby, ready to intervene if necessary, but her presence was more reassuring than intrusive. Looking good, she encouraged as Naira completed a circuit of the medical bay. "The bone is fused perfectly." Naira flexed her leg, marveling at the absence of pain. Veltari medicine was advanced, certainly, but it was reserved for those deemed worthy of investment. A defective like her would never have received such attentive care among her own people. "Thank you," she said, the words still unfamiliar on her tongue. Gratitude was not a concept the Veltari valued. Efficiency and duty needed no acknowledgement. Yet the humans seemed to thrive on this exchange, this recognition of effort freely given. "Just doing my job," Dr. Reyes replied with that easy smile Naira had come to associate with her. "Commander Blake wants to see you when you're up to it." Something about cultural exchange. Cultural exchange. Another peculiarity of human behavior. Since recovering enough to hold extended conversations, Naira had been bombarded with questions about Veltari society, technology, beliefs, not for tactical advantage or exploitation, as she had initially suspected, but out of genuine curiosity. More bewildering still, they expected, welcomed, her questions in return. She found Commander Blake in what the humans called the mess hall, a communal eating space that defied all Veltari sensibilities. On her world, sustenance was a private, utilitarian affair. Here, it was social, even celebratory. Blake sat with Lieutenant Kano, the ship's navigation officer, and Professor Chen, the expedition's xenoanthropologist. They waved her over, making space at their table. "Naira." "Perfect timing," Blake said. "We were just discussing the Arcturus Treaty. I'd value your perspective on how the Veltari view the coalition." She hesitated, still unused to having her opinion solicited. The Council considers the coalition a necessary compromise, but largely irrelevant to Velteri interests. They prefer isolation. Isolation in an interconnected galaxy seems impractical, Professor Chen observed, pushing his spectacles up his nose. The elderly academic had been most persistent in his inquiries, his enthusiasm for knowledge reminding Naira of the rare moments of joy she'd experienced in the learning centers of her youth. The Velteri believed contamination from lesser species would weaken their genetic purity, she explained, noting but no longer flinching at the expressions of distaste that crossed the humans' faces. Contact is minimized to prevent cultural pollution. Yet they participate in interstellar trade, Lieutenant Kando pointed out. The young officer had a quick mind that Naira admired. That suggests they recognize some value in interaction. Resources, Naira replied. Technology. Things that can be acquired without compromising their essence. Blake leaned forward, his dark eyes intent. And what about cooperation? Alliance? Friendship. These are, not concepts, the Velteri value. The admission felt like betrayal, though of what she wasn't sure. Strength comes from within, not from reliance on others. That's a lonely way to live, Blake said quietly. Before she could respond, the ship's alarm blared, red lights flashing throughout the mess hall. Blake was on his feet instantly, reaching for the communication panel. Bridge, report. Commander, we've detected a vessel on intercept course, came the tense reply. It's Velteri, sir. Naira's heart stuttered in her chest. They had found her. The Velteri did not tolerate the survival of exiles. It undermined the entire system. They would demand her return, and the humans, for all their unexpected kindness, would surely comply rather than risk confrontation with a technologically superior species. Blake's expression hardened. Battle stations. I want options, not apologies. He turned to Naira. We need to talk. Now. In his private quarters, Blake pulled up a holographic display of the approaching vessel. It was unmistakably Velteri, sleek, predatory, its design emphasizing speed and offensive capability. They're hailing us, he said. Before I respond, I need to know. Are they here for you? Naira nodded, unable to speak past the knot of fear in her throat. What will they do if I refuse to turn you over? The question was so unexpected that Naira could only stare at him. Refuse. You cannot refuse the Velteri. Their weapons are impressive, yes. But the horizon isn't defenseless, and we're on the edge of coalition space. Answer the question, Naira. She swallowed hard. They will demand compliance. If rejected, they will attempt to disable your ship and retrieve me by force. If successful, they will eliminate everyone aboard to prevent the spread of knowledge about their actions. Blake's expression didn't change. And if they get you back? What then? I will be terminated, she said simply, publicly, to reinforce the consequences of defiance. Blake nodded, as if she had merely confirmed what he already knew. That's not going to happen. He activated his communicator. Bridge, ignore the hail. Execute Maneuver Delta 7. Alert Coalition Command that we have a Velteri aggressor in neutral space. Naira gaped at him. You cannot protect me from them. It will mean war. It will mean standing by our principles, Blake corrected. You're under my protection now, Naira. That means something to humans. The ship lurched as it changed course, engines straining. The Velteri vessel would be faster, more maneuverable. It was only a matter of time. Why? She demanded, echoing her question from their first meeting. Why risk everything for one defective alien? Blake's gaze was steady. Because every sentient being deserves the chance to determine their own worth. Because the measure of a civilization isn't how it treats its strongest members, but its most vulnerable. His expression softened slightly. And because in the weeks you've been aboard this ship, not one crew member has found you defective. Before she could process this, the ship rocked violently. The Velteri had opened fire. They're targeting our engines, reported the bridge. shields holding at 80%. Return fire, Blake ordered. Target their weapon systems only. The Horizon shuddered as it launched a counterattack. Naira knew it was futile. Veltari shields were designed to withstand much greater firepower than this research vessel could generate. "Commander, we're receiving a message," the communications officer announced. Text only. The message appeared on Blake's display. It was written in formal Veltari, but the translation program quickly rendered it into English. "Surrender the exile Naira, formerly of House Evren, or be destroyed. The defective must not contaminate. You have one standard cycle to comply." Blake's jaw tightened. No response. "Commander," Naira began, "I cannot allow you to sacrifice yourselves. I will go." "That's not your decision to make," Blake cut her off. "Not anymore." He turned to his console, fingers flying over the controls. "I need you to trust me, Naira. Can you do that?" Trust. Another concept foreign to Veltari thinking. Yet in that moment, looking at this human who had risked so much for a stranger, Naira found it wasn't difficult at all. "Yes," she said simply. Blake nodded. "Good. Because I have a plan, and it's going to require something only you can provide." The plan, when he outlined it, was audacious to the point of insanity. It relied on human ingenuity, Naira's knowledge of Veltari protocols, and a healthy dose of what Blake called calculated recklessness. As the countdown to the Veltari deadline ticked away, the crew of the Horizon worked feverishly. Dr. Rice synthesized compounds based on Naira's biochemistry. Lieutenant Cano programmed navigational sequences that pushed the ship's capabilities to their limits. Professor Chen and Naira crafted a message that would exploit the rigid patterns of Veltari communication. When the Veltari ship hailed them again, Blake was ready. "Open a channel," he ordered. "Visual and audio." The view screen flickered to life, revealing the austere face of a Veltari elder. His luminous skin pulsed with colors that Naira recognized as indicating righteous authority. "I am Elder Tevmor of the Veltari High Council," he announced. "You harbor a condemned exile. This is forbidden." Blake stepped forward, his posture straight, his expression neutral. "I am Commander Marcus Blake of the Earth Science Vessel Horizon. We have granted asylum to Naira under Coalition law." The elder's skin flashed with patterns of contempt. "Your laws are irrelevant. The exile is Veltari property, sentenced to disposal for genetic insufficiency." "No sentient being is property," Blake replied evenly. "And we have found no evidence of genetic insufficiency. In fact, Naira has demonstrated exceptional adaptability and intelligence during her time aboard our vessel." "Deception," spat Tevmor. "The defective's patterns were measured and found wanting. It is established fact." "Facts can be manipulated," Blake countered, "or misinterpreted, or simply wrong." He gestured, and Naira stepped into view. The elder's skin pulsed with shock. "The defective lives. This is an abomination." Naira straightened her shoulders, fighting down years of conditioned submission. "I live, Elder Tevmor, and I have learned that what the Council names as defects, others call differences. What you condemn as weakness, humans value as diversity." "You speak blasphemy," Tevmor hissed. "Your contamination spreads already." "That's where you're wrong," Blake interjected. "Naira hasn't been contaminated by us. She's enlightened us." He pressed a button, and data began streaming alongside their transmission. The results of Dr. Rice's analysis of Naira's biology. "Your exile's genetic structure contains adaptations that our scientists believe could revolutionize our understanding of neurological resilience. Far from being defective, she represents an evolutionary advancement." It was a calculated exaggeration, but not entirely false. Dr. Rice had indeed discovered unusual properties in Naira's neural pathways, differences that the Veltari had interpreted as deficiencies, but might actually represent adaptations to environmental factors unknown to them. Tevmor's skin pulsed with conflicting patterns of disbelief and uncertainty. The Veltari revered genetic advancement above all else. The suggestion that they had mistakenly discarded a valuable mutation would cause significant cognitive dissonance. "This changes nothing," the elder finally declared, but his conviction had visibly wavered. "The Council's judgment is absolute." "Perhaps," Blake acknowledged, "but the Coalition's protection is equally absolute. If you fire upon this vessel again, you will be in violation of the Arcturus Treaty. The diplomatic consequences would be significant." He was bluffing. The horizon was too far from immediate Coalition assistance, and the Velteri knew it. But his next move wasn't a bluff. "Additionally, we've transmitted all our findings regarding Naira's genetic structure, along with detailed accounts of Velteri exile practices, to every Coalition member world. If anything happens to this ship, that information goes public." The threat was clear. The Velteri prized their isolation and mystique. The exposure of their practices, particularly if accompanied by evidence suggesting they had mistakenly discarded valuable genetic material, would undermine their carefully cultivated image of infallibility. "You would use blackmail." Tevmore's skin pulsed with outrage. "I prefer to call it leverage," Blake replied calmly. "Here's my proposal. The Horizon will continue to Coalition space with Naira aboard. The official record will state that she is participating in a scientific exchange program with Earth. The Velteri Council saves face, Earth gains valuable scientific insights, and Naira lives. Everyone wins." For long moments, Tevmore was silent, his skin cycling through patterns of calculation. Finally, he spoke. "This arrangement will be considered. Withdraw to the coordinates I transmit. The Council will convene." The screen went dark. Blake exhaled slowly. "They're going to accept," he said. "They value their reputation too much to risk exposure." Naira stared at him, overwhelmed. "You risked war for me." "I risked confrontation to do what's right," he corrected. "There's a difference." She shook her head, still struggling to comprehend. "Among the Velteri, I was nothing. Less than nothing. Why would you see value where they saw only defect?" Blake's expression softened. "Because humans learned long ago that uniformity is stagnation. Our greatest achievements have come from those who thought differently, who didn't fit the expected mold. Our diversity is our strength." He smiled slightly. "Besides, I've gotten to know you these past weeks. You're smart, adaptable, and braver than you give yourself credit for. Any species that would throw that away is the defective one, if you ask them." 3 days later, the Velteri transmitted their response. The deal was accepted with additional provisions. Naira would formally renounce her Velteri citizenship and would never attempt to return to Velteri space. As she thumbprinted the document, severing the last ties to her former life, Naira felt not grief but liberation. The Horizon resumed its journey to Earth, where she would begin a new life as a cultural and scientific liaison, a position Blake had somehow arranged through his Coalition contacts. That evening, the crew held what they called a welcome party in the mess hall. There was food, music, even something called dancing, that seemed to involve rhythmic movement for no practical purpose whatsoever. It was chaotic, inefficient, and utterly unlike anything in Velteri society. It was perfect. Dr. Reyes appeared at her side, offering a glass of something that sparkled. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her own glass. Naira mimicked the gesture, still awkward with human customs. "To new beginnings," she echoed. Across the room, Blake caught her eye and nodded, a simple acknowledgement that somehow conveyed volumes. In that moment, surrounded by beings who had risked everything for her not because of duty or protocol, but because they believed it was right, Naira finally understood what the Velteri had missed in their pursuit of genetic perfection. Connection, compassion, community. The things that truly made a species strong. The defective had found her place among the savages, and for the first time in her life, Naira felt complete.